pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will, I think is a good one here.
Liberal Currents presents Out of the Jaws with your hosts, Ryan Getty and Adam Gurry.
Hello, welcome to a special episode of the Out of the Jaws podcast with Liberal Currents. Ryan will not be joining me today, but someone who will be joining me is the candidate for the 10th Congressional District of New York, Brad Lander. Now, Brad Lander has been a fixture of New York City politics for a very long time. Most recently, he was in the Comptroller's office. Before that, he was on the City Council from 2009 to 2021. Where he co-founded the Progressive Caucus. And before he was in office, going back to 1993, he was very active in city politics from the private side, mostly in affordable housing and community development. So he's quite a figure. He's going now to the national stage, which we will talk about at length in our interview. But a couple of my favorite moments with Brad Lander came last year. First, when former Governor Andrew Cuomo lost the Democratic primary for mayor.
Andrew Cuomo is in the past. He is not the present or future of New York City. Good riddance.
And then shortly after that, Lander's office released a video of him at the Pride Parade, where he just looked like he was having the time of his life, and I kind of wished I had joined him there. Brad, thank you for joining the Out of the Jaws podcast on Liberal Currents. I wanted to start by looking at the year ahead, next year when the new Congress will be coming in, hopefully with the Democrats in two houses, but they will very likely have at least one house. Given that Donald Trump will still have the executive branch, can Congress do to fight on behalf of democracy? And what, in your view, should they do?
Thanks, Adam. It's great to be here. Wonderful to be on Out of the Jaws. I'm a big fan of Liberal Currents. We have to do two things at once, in my opinion. One is stand up for democracy and the rule of law by pointing out and holding accountability for all the corruption and violations of people's rights that are taking place. And at the same time, even though we won't control the White House, find ways to show people that we can actually deliver for them on some things that matter. So for the former, for rule of law, for accountability, for corruption, hearings are really good tools. And people are, you can start to see, getting sick of Trumpian corruption. It feels like things are finally starting to break through, on the slush fund, on the ballroom, even on the ridiculous, reflecting pool. And that takes being disciplined and focusing on the places that can demand enough attention, but connecting the dots better between who's getting rich here, as a result of this corruption, seems critical. I do think it's also important to focus on where rights are being violated. So I think the ICE accountability hearing should probably start in Minneapolis and demand accountability for the murders of Alex Preddy and Renee Good. And there's other areas there. I've been focusing on detained children. Like, I don't think most Americans know that we're holding, hundreds, maybe thousands of kids separated from their parents. That got so much anger in the first Trump term. So like a real focus on accountability, corruption, and violations of the rule of law with well-organized hearings that are not just don't fall into the trap of being like all about impeachment. I mean, of course, Trump should not be president, but we can't go backwards. We have to say to folks, here's where your money's being stolen. Here's who's doing it. Here's who's suffering from violations of the rule of law. Get out into the field, show real people who are being harmed, the things that make Americans mad. And on the other side, find places to deliver. To me, the most strategic place that we can do that is with the budget. I don't think we should pass a budget that doesn't restore healthcare subsidies on the exchanges and the Medicare and Medicaid cuts that Republicans made last year. That's just one of the clearest places where they have taken money out of the pockets of working people to give to billionaires and donors. And if we're strategic, we can say we're the party of putting that money back in your pocket.
And there's a lot there, but I think I'll start with that last one. How much of a commitment should the Democratic majority in whatever chamber have to not backing down on that point, for example? So we've seen how this plays out with these negotiations with Trump. More or less, he doesn't back down unless there's... So in the case of the recent sort of partial shutdown of DHS, for example, the Democrats didn't really feel the pain of it at all because a lot of things were already funded. The things that were not funded mostly hurt the Republicans. The rest of the government remained open. Food stamps they had made sure remained funded. Situations like that I can see, but categorically not passing a budget unless it's more or less undo the big bill that they did last year, especially in the medical side of it. If Trump simply says no, how long do you leave the government shut down in order to have that fight?
I mean, I think you have to take it to the finish line this time. It is, if you go in with Trump, like it's a game of chicken and he's not getting off the tractor. And I think we have to make clear that's how hard we are fighting for working families. It's not our goal to cause any other harm or shut things down. But we're not going to let him just drive our government into a ditch. And unless people see folks fighting for them and actually having the guts to take it all the way to delivering, I don't think people will trust us beyond that. And to me, it's like we really have to link, what I'll call the democracy agenda, rule of law, standing up to corruption, and the economic affordability agenda. And I think if we can do that, if we show that's who Democrats are, we fight for working families, we fight for democracy, and we name the villains and we push all the way to the finish line, then it seems to me we have a chance to win a trifecta in 2028. And I think if we show, we sort of like those things, but we're willing to just have it be status quo, same as usual, I think we'll be stuck with same as usual. And to me, it's worth having this be a time when we really take some big swings. Yeah,
I mean, completely agree. I think I might be curious, not to get overly tactical, I suppose, because these are things that you just don't know. The thing that I was interested in about the DHS case was precisely that Democrats had managed to set themselves up pretty well ahead of that fight. And I wonder if there are similar, I don't know, especially for something as big as the medical cuts, I don't know what it could conceivably be. If there are ways to lay the groundwork ahead of a fight like that.
It's a great question. And, I still have things to learn. I admit here, I haven't been through these myself. And I get that it's easy to say these kinds of things when you haven't been on the inside and you're not the one coming home and having to say I have a lot of federal workers who live in my district. And so, sure, I haven't yet had to meet with them and say, look, a furlough is really hard for your family and for mine too. But I'm worried about the future of our republic. So I'd love to, I think it's a good caveat that Democrats need to prepare the ground. Now, sometimes preparing the ground means you can do things like make sure people aren't losing their food stamps and, be working with states to make sure they're preparing. Sometimes preparing the ground is messaging. And this is why I do think the healthcare subsidies make sense. What Democrats did last year prepared the ground for this. I've been pretty critical of Democratic leadership, but I think choosing to make last year's fight about the healthcare subsidies was a good choice that Democratic leadership made. And it's now there to build on. That's a clear line everyone understands. Trump and Republicans chose to do that to you. We're going to be the party who chooses to undo that and just get the lines drawn as clearly as possible and say, look, here's why we believe it's necessary to take this. We don't want to take this fight all the way to the end. We want a budget, and we're willing to actually vote for things we don't like. I'm sure I will want bigger cuts to the military than the budget that we could pass that would restore these subsidies. But also, if the Senate's in Republican hands, or just if the White House is, to get the signature that we need to pass that budget. So, but here's why we think it's important enough to take this all the way to the finish line and try both rhetorically with organizing. Back in Trump 1, there were those die-ins where, in order to try to prevent the elimination of Obamacare, as part of the protests we were doing, there were patients all over staging die-ins. We'll need good movement coordination to make the stakes clear and the lines sharp.
Actually, that's a good jumping off point. I know you've done a lot of work resisting ICE in the last year. I believe you went to Minneapolis as well to see what was going on there, which was very fascinating. I wonder if you do have thoughts, especially someone who, even before you were in electoral politics, you're in sort of the left politics space generally. If you have thoughts on indivisible groups, the kind of mobilization we saw in Minneapolis, the collaboration we've seen from activists in LA, Chicago, Portland, DC, and Minneapolis and places like that, what it portends, how it can be useful in this fight beyond resisting when they're invaded by ICE, but in general, mobilization.
The good neighbors of Minneapolis, in my opinion, have done the most important work, showing what it looks like to stand up in a way that's grounded in being good neighbors. I've said in the past to my neighbors here in New York City, of course, if ICE had come here, if Mayor Mamdani had not been able to charm Donald Trump and keep him from sending the troops in so early, we would have resisted, but I don't think the rest of the country would have been as won over. I mean, there was something about that Midwestern good neighborliness, singing outside the hotels with the ICE officers, it's okay to change your mind, showing that their love of their neighbors was what motivated their demand that ICE get out of their city. So I really do think we learned a lot from them, in part tactically, just how you use your signal chats and be out there and, put your body, out in front, but in part how to do it in a way that's, I use the phrase Mr. Rogers with a steel spine. And I don't mean that disrespectfully to Fred Rogers. He did many things that showed a steel spine, but, a real good neighborliness, but that it just will not let them abduct your neighbors.
Yeah.
And, I mentioned the work I've been doing in recent weeks, focusing on detained kids. That's a place where folks like Ms. Rachel have been speaking up. What's moved Americans who were a couple of years ago, motivated by, what they felt like was chaos at the border, to say, I don't like what this administration is doing, is a focus on just state cruelty made visible by good neighbors. And I do think that's what we have to show. We need, of course, a path to comprehensive immigration reform and to solve a set of problems that will take, in all likelihood, a bipartisan approach. But for activism to stand up to what's happening, it is getting out there with our bodies, but in a way which is in the spirit. We've been given this great legacy of nonviolent civil resistance. And those tools, like you're out there out of love of neighbors and fellow humans. You do it with a real discipline of nonviolence. You are highlighting state violence, and it's awful that sometimes that costs people's lives, as we have now seen. But you never respond in kind with violence. You never want any of those things to happen. You're just there trying to move people to safety. And I think that's critical for us to continue. I plan to continue it. I urge other people to continue it. We'll see what happens with the elections this fall. I mean, in part, what they were doing by sending federal troops to these cities has been a trial run. What if we could occupy this city? That same set of tactics. We're bringing water bottles to people in line to vote, or it's our voter protection work, our immigrant neighbor protection work is not done in a spirit of partisanship. It's not done. We're out here because we love our neighbors, because we love our democracy, because we love our country. We're not going anywhere. And so far, I think that has shown itself to be a very effective tactic.
Well, you already anticipated the question I thought of as you were speaking about this, which was about elections. And I don't know that it's worth getting into speculation, but how worried are you, let's say, about them doing something? I mean, it's hard, ICE and even DHS as a whole only has so many agents. We're a great big country. There's only so many swing districts, and they are quite large geographically as well. There's a lot of reasons to think there's limits to what they could do, especially like now versus in 2 years. But how worried are you? How much do you think these Minneapolis, like organizing tactics can be useful in helping to keep these elections free and fair?
Yeah. Well, Trump has made very clear he will cheat and disrupt elections, and if he possibly can. So we would be fools not to take him, not just at his word, at his stated intention. But I think the good news is we see the tools we need to have for them, and they have proved really more robust than one might have feared. On the one hand, the fact that those Minneapolis good neighbors were able to push Bovino and ICE out of their city with the tactics of showing up nonviolently in the streets are exactly right. And I think it makes me optimistic that folks will do that in the places where they need to. And yes, of course, there will always be, if people have the courage, many more neighbors who love democracy. Then there will be, brown shirts out there trying to intimidate you. And having seen it gives people a little more courage to keep doing it. And for the most part, that is, I don't want to say boring work, but normal work. Like if you're a person who's bringing water bottles to people on a voting line, for the most part, you get to do that in a way that doesn't take any risks. And you get some training so that if and when it does involve risks, you try to do it in the most peaceful spirit that, singing "There's Still Time to Change Your Minds" or offering water bottles to the DHS folks who are out there as well, and praying it doesn't go badly, but being mindful that you're out there for an important purpose. We also are lucky that one aspect of federalism in this country is that localities and states control their elections. And let's count this as one place that has proven resilient, that there have been Republican local and state officials who have not been willing to give up the integrity of their democracy or their counting to authoritarian federal would-be dictators. And that can't be counted on, right? I mean, if things go badly, it seems like a place they'll go badly is something like that. Trump will put pressure on a local or a state official to misreport results, to identify corruption where it didn't take place, to And, by showing up, by reinforcing what's important, there's reason to be somewhat hopeful that those officials will not do it. If it happens, that's when we'll have an emergency scenario, and when, yes, many more lawyers and lawsuits and bodies will be required to protect the count. And here, at least, I don't know about other places, but the group Hands Off NYC was created in part to help anchor the No Kings and Hands Off marches. It's become largely a network of immigrant protection because that's what's happening right now. So people sign up and they do court watching and ICE watching, but they're starting to train people on election protection. And hopefully that'll happen through the fall. And again, hopefully no one's training will even be needed. But if it is, we'll have people ready to go.
Yes, hands off. I was going to mention as well, for our fellow New Yorkers listening, for those around the country who are listening, I definitely recommend you connect with your local indivisible group. They're almost certainly also connected with people that are doing this kind of training.
Yeah. And they're linked together. If anybody's listening, the Indivisible Network and the Hands Off Network and 5051 have all been working in really good, strong coordination.
It's very impressive to see. I do feel, not to go off on a tangent and talk when I'm interviewing you, but I do feel that this past year has sort of put to bed the idea that we can't organize anymore. There was sort of this idea for the last 20, 30 years that was it. I don't know if it was, either it's because the Cold War is over or the new media environment or the new generation or whatever it is, organizing is over. Clearly not the case, right?
And I think another thing that has been shown, you would have said, coming out of Trump 1, there was this idea of like resistance lives.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of folks have shown their mettle. That's that Mr. Rogers with a steel spine. Yes, of course, these are people who love their democracy and love their neighbors. And maybe you think that's corny, like you thought Mr. Rogers' neighborhood was corny. But boy, a lot of those folks turn out to be pretty tough, to be the ones demanding fiercer fighters. The line between sort of fighters and folders I talk about, the people are pushing harder in primaries, often include those folks. And the people that see we need to connect the dots between the democracy fights and the economic inequality and affordability fights. People do it different ways, of course, but there's a lot of interconnection there, more than you might have thought was going to be in place a year or two ago.
So if I may suggest, because you keep bringing up this Mr. Rogers with a spine idea, if you don't like implying that Mr. Rogers didn't have a spine, my co-host did an illustration once that has gotten a little bit popular in some online liberal circles. And it is a character called Evelyn Normie-Lib, who's just like a very normal liberal, like very idealistic. And then the last statement is she believes that the tree of liberty should be fed with the blood of tyrants. Like it's like, like she's very tough.
There's so many great examples of this. And I think of Fred Rogers as one. So I think of him with a steel spine. I just like emphasizing it. But I offer Ms. Rachel up also. She's in a certain way the Mr. Rogers of our day. And, I feel has shown that a love of the humanity of everybody's children can inspire you to enough courage to take on a lot of hate. Yeah. And you don't relish the blood of tyrants, but you love your neighbors enough that you're not backing down if that's what is required.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of people caring about kids and just having basic humanity, I think Liam in Minneapolis, that picture of Liam with his hat and his I think that did more to garner where, Renee Good and Alex Preddy showed how out of control ICE is to many Americans. Like, he could come for us. But what Liam showed is these kids are people. They're like your kids. They're like your brother. They're like every kid in your life.
Agreed.
Yeah. Well, okay. So we talked about what Congress could do. I'm very curious what, and you mentioned, you'll be going to Congress for the first time. You'll be learning the ropes and things. But how you're thinking going, and what your individual role will be in Congress. What you want to set out to do.
Great. So first, I do feel like the honor to represent your neighbors is a pretty profound thing. And I've been talking with people about that. So there's a lot I want to fight for just on behalf of my neighbors. So, it looks like next year we'll be fighting for a surface transportation bill that makes sure for most of the country that their roads get paved. Here, we need our roads paved and we need our subways invested in. So there's a lot of that. There's just how do you deliver and make government actually work for people? And if I could come back after 2 years and show people we restored healthcare subsidies on the exchanges so you could afford your healthcare, and we want a transportation bill that improves our subways so the elevators are working and you could count on it being there on time. We don't have to raise the fares. Some of those just bread and butter. I mean, I want to get to Medicare for all and big investments back in, affordable housing and universal childcare and investments in climate. But I want to show people some concrete ways government delivers for them. I'm a big believer in these partnerships between folks on the inside and folks organizing in the streets. And I do think immigration will be sort of a big way for doing that. But there's other areas. I'm out on picket lines with workers in my district, not only because I care about their rights, because I want people to understand democracy as a project that links people in their workplaces and their neighborhoods and their communities and their elected officials showing up in partnership with that. And you don't know exactly where the wins will come there. But I think that's really important to do. And I feel a particular role right now that I might not have projected a couple of years ago, that comes in part from having cross-endorsed Mayor Mamdani last year and trying to chart a pathway by which American Jews like me, who believe fiercely in inclusive multiracial democracy, and the idea, and this goes to what you were saying about Liam, we have this phrase that everyone is created b'tselem Elohim, in the image of God. And, I believe that's not just as true about immigrant kids as my kids, but about Palestinian kids as my kids. And I plan to show up in Congress on the one hand as like a proud Jewish New Yorker, but also committed to be, the Jewish member of Congress or one of the Jewish members of Congress who's most committed to fighting boldly for Palestinian human rights, not only because they deserve it and I care about that conflict, but because I do believe, American Jews, everybody's got a role to play. And everyone's got a unique and interesting role to play. The role that American Jews have played in being part of the civil rights and social justice coalition, demanding a place for ourselves free from anti-Semitism and hate, but understanding that only really is possible through shared safety, that it won't work to protect, just like build a fence around your community or your people. And that's what, in part, the American experiment is about, but we've got a role to play right now. So that's one place that I'll be working hard to step up as well.
Great. I am a bit curious when you mentioned about the collaboration between those on the outside and those on the inside, and you were talking, the picket fence, I understand that's pretty straightforward. How do you see that working? Obviously, some of that is you show up for them in some of these events and things, but is it also like they're an information channel for you to bring things of import before Congress? How do you see that working in practice?
Yeah, I'm very intrigued by this model they've used some in other countries of citizens' assemblies to get people involved in answering hard questions. Probably the most famous place they did this is in Ireland, when there was clarity of a need for a reset on their abortion and reproductive rights policy, which was very contentious given Ireland's, kind of Catholic nature and history, but a real understanding of a desire to open that dialogue up so that new decisions could get made. And an example I'll give of where something like that is clearly needed is around AI right now. Everywhere I go right now, it's a debate around AI in New York City's public school classrooms, but of course, around data centers and climate and privacy, and this AI that busted its containment and went and stole the answer key. we're at a moment where that issue is really roiling our current systems and capacities, and people want and need more from Congress, and Congress needs to step up and act. But I don't think it'll make sense to do that in a vacuum. So, does some technology like a citizens assembly, which enables people to participate in new ways in talking about, some very practical things. We're concerned about where the energy is coming from and what's happening with the water and who's got control of the privacy and the data, and is there a kill switch? Things for which experts can weigh in, but people need to be thinking and making the decisions. And then there's some things like what should be in our schools that I really think are a good opportunity for a much more robust and different kind of conversation than we've had. What are the things we're going to need to be teaching our kids if we want them to grow up critical thinkers and be able to collaborate and be creative and be citizens, given how rapidly technologies and pedagogy are changing. So yes, some of the models are more get out on the picket line, and I'm definitely someone who is out at the marches, is doing the court watching, is joining with hands off, is joining workers when they're on strike to show visibly that kind of representation. The best legislation that I passed in New York City were things that came to me through those channels. So I passed legislation to make us the first city in the country to give stable schedules to fast food and retail workers, because I had heard from them how erratic and impossible their lives were, or to protect freelancers from getting stiffed out of money they had earned. Those channels really matter. And then there's some of these, town hall or citizens assembly, or we have participatory budgeting here that even provide people with a more engaged way to participate on the cutting edge of what government's trying to do.
It's a lot to unpack there, but there's some questions I do want to get to, and we're at the halfway mark, so I'm going to jump into them. Much of this has to do with thinking further ahead to a hypothetical 2029 where we have one. And we have the option to do things differently than we did under Biden. So the first I want to do is accountability. Should a 2029 DOJ pursue prosecutions for the crimes that have been committed? And how far should those go? If so, are we talking just the leaders? Are we talking Stephen Miller and Trump himself? Or are we also talking the ICE agents that, there's obviously the ones who actually murdered people. We need to prosecute those. I think that's not even a question. But there's a lot more that is happening. They're going up. They're breaking people's windows. They're absolutely out of control. How far do we take this in your point of view?
Yeah, we're going to need, and so this, I'm gonna let myself imagine we've got a trifecta here, that we've got, Democratic control of the White House and Congress in order to implement something bold. And it's going to have to combine accountability, and as I say, I think start with those folks who killed people, like the very specific places. And similarly with folks who have just bilked our government for large dollar sums, and in places that expose us to harm, so where that's been corruption with a foreign government, or, so I do think it doesn't need to be every single person that was employed in a government agency that did rotten things. To me, focus on places of the most grievous harm, the most, despicable villains, and yes, show accountability, because if you don't have any of it, if the rule of law doesn't matter, then it's hard to figure out how to keep moving forward. But I guess I would say first, I don't think we want to turn Donald Trump into a martyr one more time. Like, I would like to hold people accountable for these grievous harms and crimes and consign him to the dustbin of history as rapidly as we can. And I want to be moving boldly on a broad economic populist agenda. and offer people an opportunity to come in. I mean, to me, those Minneapolis neighbors standing outside those ICE officers' hotel rooms saying, there's still time to change your mind, is a spirit we want to keep alive. So exactly where the line is between what gets prosecuted and where there's room for bridge building and healing and restoration, I don't know that I have exactly the lines, but I think if we show some high profile, grievous harm, focus on people toward the top, people who actually profiteered, people who caused very specific and visible harms to their neighbors. If you do some of that, you don't need to go so broadly that everybody's looking over their shoulder.
In terms of setting the stage for that, you mentioned hearings early on. What do you think of the notion of using Congress's investigative powers in order to actually build the cases that a 2029 DOJ could use?
Well, faster even than that for those ICE agents to build the cases that prosecutors can use now, where things should be prosecuted by a state level prosecutor. Congress can do investigations that are in conjunction with or consultation with or provide, evidence that can be used by state level prosecutions, by attorneys general. One interesting example is, the state AGs are pursuing, this is a little different because it's a monopoly case, not a pure corruption case, but the case against Live Nation, that everyone sees is just bilking you for fees. And then it turns out when you learn a little more, they're bilking the venues and they're bilking the artists. It's, as evil goes, it's not as high as some other things, but as just clear profiteering corruption, a lot of it. Justice Department had started that investigation under Biden. Trump had continued it for a while. The state AGs had joined. Then the Justice Department's like, oh yeah, fine. We reached a settlement where they don't have to do anything. But the state AGs wouldn't drop the lawsuit, and we'll see what the judge rules. But I think it is very useful to add the House and hopefully the Senate to this playing field to tee up cases where criminal prosecutions are possible in the case of things like ICE agents killing people. Some states like New York have passed new legislation creating civil liability. So in its budget that was passed in June, there's a law now in New York State that people can sue for civil damages where a federal officer has knowingly violated their constitutional rights. So there might be opportunities to use investigations that tee things up under those laws, for things state attorneys general might do, and then absolutely for things that the U.S. DOJ could do in the next administration. So
you mentioned how things will play out in court for some of these lawsuits. That brings me actually naturally to the next question, which is, how do you feel about court reform, which is a broad topic that can mean many things. Senator Wyden, I don't know if you remember this, but in 2023, he proposed a bill that would have expanded the court over multiple terms so that it wasn't a purely partisan grab. Yeah. There's also just simply doing a one-time expansion saying because it's such an emergency on behalf of democracy. Everyone's afraid that will turn into a spiral of everyone doing it. I think there's ways out of that, but I don't want to hear from me. I want to hear from you. What do you think about the whole topic?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need Supreme Court reform that includes expansion and term limits. It would indeed be much better to do with the constitutional amendment played out over time so that it is not a partisan one-time issue, but is something that expands the court, provides better representation, makes it so no one president can appoint as many people as Trump has, and creates a better balance for the long term. If that require, and I guess I would be willing to use Congress's power to expand the court, or at least the threat of it, to try to push for the better solution. So it seems to me Democrats might say to Republicans in that term, we feel really strongly about this. We believe there should be a bipartisan constitutional amendment. If you're willing to work with us on that, great. If not, we're going to push forward with court reform, and we'll propose the term limits that would have to be done by a constitutional amendment. But if we can't pass them on our own, so be it, with the hope that that threat or leverage at best leads to an agreement to do it in a way that plays out over time with real term limits and doesn't just mean that anytime someone's got a trifecta, they try this. In a certain way, that is what happened in Roosevelt. Like, Roosevelt threatened. In that case, the court backed down. And, it will be interesting to think about what are the pieces of legislation. Would it be Medicare for all? Or, what are the things that we would be passing in Congress that risk most immediately getting struck down by this court if it doesn't change? I think we have to be willing to think out of the box on the Supreme Court and do expansion and term limits. It's going to be necessary to think out of the box about Congress as well. We're rapidly headed to a situation where states are just sending one party in their congressional delegations. That's just terrible for everyone. So things we might not have expected to look at previously, like multi-member districts or proportional representation, are going to have to be on the radar screen. And that is not just for Democrats. It's true that we face some disadvantages in the landscape, but it's like there's a lot of Republicans who live in New York City and they deserve to be represented. There's a lot of Democrats in Idaho and they deserve to be represented also.
No, and I mean, we know from how proportional representation works that if Democrats enact it, even if liberals win majorities, it won't necessarily be a Democrat majority. It will probably be Democrats as the big party coalitioning with other liberal parties. So it's not necessarily a selfish, even for imposing it on red states, it's not necessarily a selfish imposition on the part of Democrats, I would say. Well, you're speaking my language right now. PR is a drum we beat a lot at Liberal Currents, so we try and push.
It's interesting because I always thought of it as a thing I liked the idea of, but seemed so far away from practical in the American political context that it was, kind of an enjoyable theoretical conversation, but not a real political one. But I do think that is shifting. We are so close now to having gerrymandered Congress into this disastrous place. And I do think people can wake up together across the aisle and say, we have just reached a place of such disaster. And you can't get out of it with new strategies for line drawing. It won't be fixable with new rules for drawing districts the way we have them, and getting people to think out of the box, to explore proportional representation and multi-member districts, and then dealing with members of Congress. I worry a little. I feel like there's this idea that, well, to do that, you'll have to have the members feeling safe, so you'll grow Congress to do it. And I don't know that a 1,000-member Congress will be too effective. So, but it is time to start having this conversation for real. I guess the nice thing here, maybe a different way to say it, is because we're so afraid of the ways our democratic institutions have lost trust, have been corroded, have been corrupted. You can kind of like cling to them rather than let yourself imagine something renewed rather than just protected. And I do think something like proportional representation is a great example of that. So many people are like, I like the idea of thinking of myself as a member of the Social Democratic Party, or a member of the Moderate Party, or a member of the Libertarian Party. Give people a way of thinking that feels generative, not that just feels sort of gritted teeth.
Well, again, if I can be permitted a bit of promotion here, you are speaking our language again. We recently published a print publication, the Reconstruction Papers, the idea of which is precisely that we should not have this defensive posture. Trump has been destroying these institutions, but we shouldn't try and undo what we did. We should be reimagining them better than they were. I enjoy hearing that.
Great. All right. I'll check it out. Thank you.
What I want to make sure to get to, my last question here. which is a difficult one. What odds do you give victory? And by that, I mean, not necessarily victory in November, not even necessarily victory in 2028, but like actual victory, so that we get off this wheel of a fairly ordinary center-left party trying to govern its best and a fascist party that is trying to destroy our democracy every 4 years. What chance do you give us? I mean, you don't have to give a number. I'm just saying how you're feeling about it.
Well, first I want to say, I do think it feels to me, I don't want to say entirely binary, but I do think the odds are pretty good that either we will succeed in making some big, bold moves and renew people's belief in and the capacity of our democratic system to deliver, or, I'll, as a new member, have a front row seat to the decline of the republic. I think it feels like, one of those two pathways is quite likely.
Yeah.
And that kind of humming along in this mediocre way, but stable, that feels to me very unlikely. Like, I really think if we don't get this done and we wind up stuck in this loop with AI coming, with the climate continuing, with people's precarity increasing, whatever, with birth rates, I think there's a set of reasons to believe we will either make some bold moves that put us on a new path, or we will really be in a very bad place that is much worse than it feels today. How to weigh the odds between those two scenarios? I use this phrase. I guess it's a little risky because I don't know that that Gramsci really would have published on liberal currents, but that phrase he has, pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will, I think is a good one here. You can see all the reasons why the deck is stacked against the kinds of things we're talking about. I'm clear about them. They are possible. They are possible. I guess what I would say is they're not impossible. That we are capable of doing those things, and the clarity that we need to is sharp. And in these elections right now, you can feel people's energy and anger and demand for change. That's part of what has to be channeled in these directions to make something good happen, because it's an anger that if it doesn't succeed in making some of these changes, you can imagine becoming risky. So I guess what I would say is less than 50-50. But also a real shot that all our energy should go into making sure we beat the odds.
It's a good answer. And I think we have a little more time, but I think I want to end on that, actually. That's a really good note to end on. I will give you, if there's anything you want to say, make sure a final note you want to message you want to get across beyond that, please take the time to do so.
Yeah, I guess just for everyone to keep moving with that level of energy. You can see some of that playing out in the primaries. You can see it playing out in the work people are doing in the No Kings marches and in the immigrant protection and in places like Minneapolis and elsewhere. We got to keep that up. It's on elected officials to push for pathways that do it, but it's on citizens to keep pushing regardless. So that seems to me just everybody's responsibility. And a thing I really like about liberal currents that I just will praise and underline is it's a complicated time in that the need for populist anger to confront corruption, sclerosis, and inequality is present. Like, I feel that. But also, populism has risks. Public anger has risks. And keeping people in a place where you feel that anger and passion for change, but also an insistence on public dialogue and pluralism and nonviolence is also really critical. And so all the venues that are committed to both those things are important places right now. And it's energizing work. It's good work. It's necessary work, and let's go do it.
All right. Well, thank you. Yes, and thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.
Thanks for listening to Out of the Jaws, presented by Liberal Currents. You can find Out of the Jaws anywhere you watch or listen to podcasts. Liberal Currents is an entirely subscriber and contributor-funded publication. If you wish to subscribe, support Liberal Currents, or grab LC merch, visit liberalcurrents.com today.